Hi everyone, Pastor Jimmy at Mount Pleasant Baptist Church. Going to continue our journey to the cross with Jesus Christ. When we last left in the last video on Thursday, it was, if you can call it this, kind of a cliffhanger that we left on. Jesus was praying. His disciples couldn't stay awake with him while he prayed. And as he came to them and he woke them up, I left with a mob and soldiers coming to betray Jesus Christ. And so as we begin today's lesson, as we begin today's study on what happened on Friday, Friday was could be called the most important day in the history of Christianity. It could be called the worst day for some people. It can be called the best day. But one thing about today is we could spend hours and hours and hours upon what happened on that Friday after Jesus was arrested. But instead, we're just going to spend a few minutes today, and we're just going to look at some of the highlights. I encourage you to go read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and read and see what happens on this Friday, this, as many people call it, as we call it in the world today, Good Friday. And as you read it, you'll start asking, well, why is it called Good Friday after we see what happens today? It's called Good Friday because we were all given hope because of the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made. So the first thing that we see on this Friday as we go into our study on Friday, we see Jesus ending his prayer session. We see him going to disciples. And we see Judas coming with the authorities and with a group of men to arrest Jesus Christ. And so the first thing we see is we see him being betrayed by Judas, probably just right after midnight or early Friday morning. We see Judas coming with the soldiers. We see him coming and they're arresting Jesus Christ. They really have no reason to arrest Jesus Christ. There's really no authority for them to arrest him. Doing it at night was technically illegal, and so they're trying to do it so that the crowds don't know what's going on, so that they can arrest and try Jesus without people knowing about it. And so we see Jesus being betrayed by Judas, one of his 12, one of his inner circle, one of his 12 apostles, disciples there. And so Judas comes, betrays him with a kiss. We see Jesus arrested, and then we see Jesus taken to the former high priest house and having I guess you would call it informal trial or a trial here. And we see them coming before Jesus, and we see them setting this up to put him on trial and having false witnesses and asking him questions and trying to get him, in their eyes, blaspheme against God. And so we see them put him on trial. The other thing that we see during this time is we see Peter begin to deny Jesus. If you remember, Jesus had told Peter, he said, "You'll deny me 3 times. And as you read through what happens on Friday, you'll see that this comes true, and Peter does deny Jesus 3 times and then leaves in shame. So we see Peter denying Jesus Christ those times as was predicted. Well, after the trial, the fake trial, ever how you want to look at it, but after they put Jesus up on trial, after sunrise that day, they have the full council there, and they condemn Jesus to death. And because of the Roman rule there, and he was condemned to death, they had to go to the leaders, so they sent Jesus to Pontius Pilate. And while Jesus is with Pontius Pilate, we won't go over all the details that's going on there, but what he's with Pontius Pilate, we see Judas, the one that betrayed Jesus. We see him begin to change his mind. And as he's changing his mind, he returns the silver, and the Sanhedrin, the priests, the Sadducees, Pharisees, those that paid him off, they refused to take the silver, so we see him throw it down. And then we see him go and hang himself. And so we see the end of Judas's life there as he goes and hangs himself. Now if we go back to Pilate, we see Pilate questioning Jesus, and he can't find anything wrong. So he sends him to Herod, the ruler over this land at this time. And so Jesus goes to Herod. Herod questions him, kind of a fake, another mock trial here. And Herod says, "I don't see any reason." So he sends him back to Pilate, and then Pilate questions him again. And he beats him, and then he goes out there and he asks the crowd, "What do you want us to do?" And they free another prisoner instead of Jesus, and the crowd yells, "Crucify Jesus." Now, I want to stop for a second and tell you there's a lot more detail than I'm giving you here. There's a lot more detail if you read through the story. I'm just trying to keep these videos as short as I can to just get you to go and read and let you know the details on your own. Find the details on your own. But know that there's a lot more. But another thing to think about is, remember how long Jesus has been up at this time. Jesus, the disciples couldn't stay awake while Jesus was praying, and Jesus now is exhausted, and now he's being sent, and he's been beaten so bad that people can't even recognize him. He can't even carry his cross up to Calvary. And so we see Jesus come before Pilate. We see Pilate basically washing his hands clean of what's going to happen to Jesus. We see the people yell, "Crucify him, crucify him." And so Jesus is condemned to death on a Roman cross. And so then we see Jesus begin that march carrying his cross up to the mount. And Jesus couldn't carry his own cross. He'd been beaten so bad and mocked that he couldn't even carry his own cross. So another man is chosen to carry his cross upon the mount. Then we see him march up to the mount. We see him go there. We see him nailed to the cross, hung between two thieves, a thief on either side. And then we see some miraculous events happen here. We see one thief that condemns himself by condemning Jesus. We see another thief ask for forgiveness, and Jesus forgives him and says, "I'll see you in paradise today." We see him continue to be mocked. We see a Roman soldier look and understand that he truly was the Son of God. We see Jesus ask for forgiveness as he takes his last breaths. He asks for forgiveness for those who have done this, for they don't know what they've done to me. And we see Jesus dying upon the cross. We see God doing all these miraculous things. We see the sky going dark. We see earthquakes. We see the temple veil split in half. All of these things are important. And all of these things we could spend hours and hours upon studying. But know that Jesus hung upon that cross, and that Jesus did die upon that cross. There was no faking his death or anything like that. Jesus died upon the cross. When he died upon the cross, a man named Joseph of Arimathea comes and asks to take Jesus' body down. They remove his body, and Joseph goes and buries him in his tomb, in his tomb that he gives over to Jesus. And so, the events of Friday, horrific events. We see Jesus falsely tried. False witnesses come up against him. We see him taken before Pilate, condemned to death, beaten so badly that you can't even recognize him. We see him nailed to a cross. We see him hanging there, excruciating pain. We see him stabbed in the side with blood and water flowing. Then we see him dying. And then we see his body removed from the cross. We see him laid in a tomb to rest. But the good news is the story doesn't end there. To the world, Saturday's a pretty quiet day. But then comes Sunday morning, everything changes for everyone in the world on Sunday morning. And as we'll see in the next video, we'll see that the cross was just the beginning of the journey for Jesus Christ. And how Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, changes the world as we know it.